Today, we're diving into one single, brutal day that left a permanent scar on American labor history. A day that started as a strike for just a little bit of dignity and ended in fire and tragedy. This wasn't just a protest, you see. It was practically a war between immigrant miners and one of the wealthiest men in the world. This is the story of the Ludlow Massacre. So let's lock in on that date. Everything we're talking about today went down on this one day, April 20th, 1914. For the striking coal miners and their families down in southern Colorado, that morning probably started with hope that they could win a better life. But it would end up being a flashpoint in one of America's most violent labor conflicts. So where does this all begin? Well, not in a mine, but in a makeshift city made of tents. This was the Ludlow colony. It was home to thousands of miners who'd been evicted, many of them from places like Greece, Italy, and Eastern Europe. And they had just survived an absolutely brutal winter in these tents, all while fighting for basic rights against the coal company, which was owned by the Rockefellers. Now, let's be really clear about what kicked this all off. This was not a protest that just got out of hand. Nope. This was a planned assault. The Colorado National Guard, along with a private militia hired by the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, literally rolled up on the colony with machine guns. And this wasn't some brief skirmish either. The battle raged for the entire day. Can you just imagine the terror and the chaos? We're talking a long, brutal siege, with striking miners using hunting rifles to try and defend their families against a really well-armed, organized force. As evening started to fall, the battle took an even more horrifying turn. The sound of gunfire started to give way to the roar of flames. And this is where a brutal conflict became an undeniable massacre. And here's where the human element just comes into sharp focus. To get away from the constant gunfire, a lot of the women and children took shelter in these cellars, basically crude pits they had dug out under their canvas tents for exactly this reason. These were supposed to be their safe havens. But they weren't safe. As it got dark, the militia moved in and set the tent colony on fire. The whole canvas city just went up in flames, turning those very shelters that were meant for protection into these suffocating, fiery traps. So what was the final, devastating cost? Well, when the smoke finally cleared, somewhere between 19 and 25 people were dead. And, a number like that, it just can't possibly capture the individual stories of loss from that single day of violence. And here it is. This is the detail that seared this event into the nation's memory forever. Among the dead were children. In one single cellar, which became known as the death pit, 2 women and 11 children suffocated as the fire raged right above them. And that fact, more than any other, is what would absolutely shock the country. But the story doesn't just stop when the fires go out. Oh no. The flames of Ludlow were about to ignite a firestorm that would spread far, far beyond southern Colorado. When word got out about what happened, and especially when people heard about the deaths of the children, it just triggered this furious public outrage all across the country. This wasn't some local labor dispute anymore. It had become a national scandal, and everyone was pointing the finger directly at the Rockefeller family. And all that outrage, it just fueled more conflict. The massacre was meant to break the strike, but it had the exact opposite effect. It led to 10 more days of what was basically open warfare in the Colorado coal fields, as enraged miners went looking for retribution. A direct and brutal escalation. When you think about it, the events of that day happened on just one small piece of land, but their impact was immense. It forced a national conversation on the power of corporations, it helped push forward new child labor laws and the fight for an 8-hour workday. And it leaves us with a really critical question. How can a single tragic event ignite a firestorm that completely reshapes a nation's conversation about justice, power, and human rights?